white people will get told we actually can't tell black protesters what's right and what's wrong, such as lawless rioting and looting, because we can't imagine the frustration and exasperation without their lived experience as a black person under systemic racism. So Lyle Shelton's asked a question: do you believe there is systemic racism in Australia? Let's address that question as part of what don't we know as the average white lived experience that the average black lived experience could give us insight on.
There's a lot of nonsense that is spoken about. As human beings, there are basic things that all human beings live by. You know, we love our families, we look after our families, we work, we do things, we don't steal from each other, we don't physically have violence against each other. These are basic human traits and that. So this idea that you don't understand justice and you don't understand, what's it like in certain circumstances. Of course, you don't know what it's like to be an Aboriginal or a Torres Strait Islander on a day-to-day basis, or I don't have a clue in a lot of ways about how Europeans and Anglo-Saxons, Australians and that do too. But this idea that you don't understand justice, you don't understand what right and wrong, and that you don't have a say in about what's happening around your community, what's happening around your city, what's happening around your nation, it's just nonsense. You know, you just look at the issues and the riots in Minnesota now, and you see a lot of these shops that were burnt down, a lot of these buildings that were burnt down, were African Americans.
Yeah.
These were people who were running a shop just like an Asian person does, or a European person, or any other race in the world does it. They're running a shop just like anyone else. They're trying to get their businesses going. They know what it's like to have their. They know now what it's like to have their business burned down, just as much as a white person can sympathise and understand that pain. This idea that you don't have a right to speak is just a load of nonsense. Just because I'm Aboriginal, you've all got to be quiet. You've got to listen to my wisdom. And sometimes I'm pretty smart. But you got to be quiet and just accept it is nonsense. If someone says something you don't agree with, you have a right to say that. And as we were saying earlier, if you look at some of that, about the brutality of what happened, we all understand that as human beings. We also all understand that burning down your own suburb or your own city, or attacking innocent people who had nothing to do with this, and we all understand that is wrong. And so this idea that you should step back and just say, oh yeah, that's fine, let's go ahead. I just saw some nonsense reporting on the American media and even the Australian media and that about this thing of we've got to respect this. These were not peaceful protests. Yes, the vast majority of people weren't peaceful. Yes, there's this two approaches: there's peaceful demonstrations, and then there's other ones which are just violent. It's just burning down around the city. It's just an attack. I've seen some brutal things done to people who were just totally innocent, had nothing to do with the brutality against George Floyd, and also any other people who had been brutalised over the years. And yet they're the ones who are in hospital. There are some people who are even dead now. So I think we've got to get back to basically everyone has a right to have a comment. Everyone has a right to see what's going on. Everyone has a right of understanding, and I believe that as human beings we do understand what the issue of right and wrong.
Jacinta, tell me about racism in Australia. Is it systemic? What does systemic even mean when people say that? And obviously, in a population of millions of people, we're going to have more than a handful of bad apples or complete jerks, which would include racists. But does that make us a racist nation?
We are most certainly not a racist nation. We are a very successful multicultural nation, and I'm sick to death of people looking for constantly on the hunt for racism, and then so making things up, making things appear as though they're racist when they're in fact not. And this is a wonderful country full of opportunity for absolutely anyone who's prepared to take that opportunity. I think growing up in a place like Alice Springs, having an Aboriginal mother and a white Australian father, that was my norm and the norm for many, many kids. And throughout the Northern Territory, in fact, it's normal to be involved in multicultural community. And of course, in other parts of the country too. But I find that particularly in more, let's say, civilised, if you like, built-up cities, that's where you tend to find individuals who will exacerbate something and make a big deal out of something that is particularly, not so relevant, or pretend that there's all this racism about the place, and it tends to come from more privileged Indigenous Australians, this argument that there's racism everywhere. I mean, if you take, for example, the lovely rapper Briggs, he's always carrying on about how tough it is to be Aboriginal when he's one of the most privileged Indigenous people in this country. And, growing up, if the worst thing that could ever happen was he couldn't get a home loan, well, then I'd suggest that he should come to Central Australia and see how marginalised Aboriginal people whose first language is not English, how they live their lives, and how they're struggling because they're being told by people like him and protesters that assimilation is a dirty word, it's an evil thing, so therefore don't assimilate. So therefore, in other words, don't grasp the tools that you need in a modern world that everyone else is succeeding with and advancing with. Don't grasp those tools, because then you'd be assimilating, and that is racism. So we are not a racist nation at all. And, the one thing I'll say about America, I think they do struggle with their race issues a lot more than Australia. I think we've got a lot better here in Australia. But the one thing that I will notice also from everything that's going on in the rioting is the fact that there is this wave of voices now coming through you've seen the footage of the police who knelt down with the protesters because they too want to be part of solving this. They too believe strongly that their colleague did the wrong thing, committed murder, and they want to be part of resolving this as much as those protesters. And there are people coming forward voicing this loudly and clearly. And hats off, I saw a video of protesters who were standing in front of a business so that looters couldn't get in, risking their own lives, because of course we've seen where people have been attacked and there's possibly someone murdered by looters. But there are protesters, who are saying, look, we're here for the cause and we don't want the looting to take place. So those sorts of, things are coming to light as well. I think during such times, this is when nations can prove that, in fact, you're wrong. We're not racist and we want to resolve these issues and we want to do them together. And that's where the focus should be put.
Michael Connery is, taking a contrary view to most of the commentators tonight. And I'm keen to, he's being civil, so I want to include that. He's saying, why are First Australians still asking for reconciliation if we are not racist?
Well, I'm not asking for reconciliation, and I know there's plenty of others who aren't asking for reconciliation, because personally, I feel like I'm a product of reconciliation. I've been reconciled all my life. And sometimes I feel as though it's a word that's used by some to control a group of others. Sometimes I feel that it is abused in that way, because to me, reconciliation is when everybody gets to come to the table and sit at the table, and it's about generating and creating understanding, that I see that happen too on a daily basis. And those that would argue that that's not the case, well, I think it's because they don't want it to be the case. They don't want to succeed in that space. I mean, if we decided, all right, well, we're reconciled, we wouldn't have to pour funding into attempting.
That would be the end of a very lucrative industry, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Just to follow up on that, one thing that really drives me mad, and I always remember my father when he talks about this. He's passed away now, but he used to carry the dog tag with him. So the first 13 years of my life, I lived in a segregated society in Australia, and that's just a fact of what it was like. But since those 60s, things have changed, and my father always carried his dog tag. The dog tag is what Aboriginals called it. Is like a little passport that you, in New South Wales, you had to carry on you if you were an adult and you wanted your kids to go to a public school. You wanted, if you wanted to be able to be exempt from the Aboriginal laws, and they used to be under what they really strange title, the Aboriginal Protection Laws that operated in New South Wales. And if you didn't have that on you, you could be arrested and you could be locked up and you could be then put back on a reserve or a mission. In his old age, when young people were coming up to him, now these are young people who had the incredible advantage. When I was a kid, someone said to us, if you're going to university, we would have said, what's university? You've got thousands of Aboriginals going to university now. You've got doctors and lawyers, even though I don't know if lawyers help civilisation. But you have a whole wide range of people out there, engineers, 6,000 Aboriginals working in the mining industry, from tradies right up to superintendents of mine sites and stuff like that. So you've got this amazing. He used to get sick and tired of people coming and saying, "Oh, this is a racist country. This is terrible." And he said, and he used to pull out he still carried it. In fact, he carried it to his grave. He wanted to be buried with it because he said, "This is what we fought against. This is what we wanted to be equal." And we had a lot of Australians come together. Everyone forgets the 1967 referendum. Over 90% of Australians voted for Aboriginal people to be equal and to be together as citizens of this country. And my family, my older brothers and sisters demonstrated and worked with those people to do that. And he said, this is what we've moved from. You have great opportunities today. You don't understand fully what, they talk about we're a structural racist society. You said, you don't even know what that is, because I actually lived in that period when it was. And so I always use the term, I don't rate a country by its beginning and its past history, because name me a country in the world that didn't have a bloody start. Name me one. You'd be very, very hard to find anyone to have that. But I rate a country by how it overcome that bad history and moved into the future. And that's where I rate Australia very highly on. I challenge anyone that can show me a country like Australia with all these different cultures that have come here, hundreds of different cultures that have come here, hundreds of different people have come here and built this incredible nation. I say to people, show me a country that is better than ours. And yet I have not heard anyone who can come up with another country that is better than ours.
I agree completely, and that's my point. There's no refugee camps here in Australia, or trying to get out of here to a better nation. There's no refugee camps leaving America for Canada. People aren't queuing up to flee the persecution because you can't. Dead man walking if you're black in America. Just ridiculous hyperbole coming from media and elitists over there.
The great tragedy in all of this is that the more you call everything racism, the less meaning the term racism actually has. So in trying to fight racism by making everything racist, you actually make nothing racist at all and defeat your very purpose. The West is far from perfect, and I think we all know that. We all acknowledge that Australia is a great country, America is a great country, and at the same time, I think we're all mature enough to realise that Australia has its problems, as does the United States. I think it's incredibly important in the midst of our present troubles that we resist these opportunistic exaggerations of those who insist that we are rotten to the core. What we owe every person in our nation is a free society. And I don't mean a society free of bigotry, because that's impossible, because bigotry, once it's eliminated from the legal system and from different organizations, bigotry will always exist in people's hearts. So we can't promise people a society free of bigotry, but we can create a society where every person is equal before the law and every person has a vote. And then beyond that, we can encourage people to get on and make the best life they possibly can by being responsible for themselves, as Jacinta brilliantly pointed out a moment ago. But the left don't want to address issues on a case-by-case basis, which is why the murder of one man becomes all of America is racist. The ill treatment of a specific Indigenous person becomes Australia is racist to the core. And the reason people insist on this is that if they can say that the country is rotten to the core, they can win overarching power to re-engineer all of society. And this is the great paradox of leftism or progressivism. They always conflate our sins of the past with our present situation so that the two become indistinguishable. And so they claim to take us forward by looking at the present, but only ever seeing the past. And so whatever situation you can nominate, they never deal with that specific situation. The whole thing becomes all of the country is racist. We were founded on racism. Therefore, you've got to give us power to undo everything and re-engineer all of society. And that's a tragedy that becomes the narrative.
As a child of the 80s and 90s, I didn't see in any of the groups or communities or schools racism at all. We were all taught to be colorblind when we were dealing with all of our friends and family and interactions. That was a very strong moral code drilled into us. But recently, in about the last 5 to 10 years, I've noticed that the universities themselves have been encouraging racism by putting everything through the lens of race. And that's pretty much the fastest way to turn a society into a racist one, to make the focus of everything race. And it's very interesting to watch that change from almost non-existent to every discussion point is now about race. And that has made people by far more racist in their everyday interactions, particularly online.
It's not enough to do nothing. It's time for us to do something.